On my son's birthday, he said his gift was for me to disappear. The laughter hit me first sharp and sudden, like the pop of a balloon too close to the ear. It rose from the dining room, full of cheer and youth and the kind of ease that leaves no room for someone like me. I stood just beyond the archway, clutching a small box wrapped in navy paper and twine. I'd tied it myself that morning with trembling fingers and too much care. Inside, a watch. Nothing fancy. Just something I thought he'd like. Something a father gives his son to say, "I still remember when you learned to tell time." He didn't open it. "Dad," he said, grinning, glass of champagne in hand, "my gift this year is for you to disappear." The room paused, briefly, like a record skipping in an old jukebox. Then someone chuckled. Then someone else. And just like that, the laughter resumed, louder this time, filling in the silence I left behind. I didn't say a word. Didn't ask if he was joking. Didn't ask if he remembered the nights I rocked him through fevers, the mornings I drove an hour just to sit through 5 minutes of his science fair. The winter I picked up double shifts so he wouldn't see his mother cry over an electric bill. I set the gift down on the sideboard next to a half-empty bottle of sparkling cider and walked toward the kitchen. My shoes were too soft to make a sound on the tile, and that felt right. I'd grown too used to being quiet. The kitchen was warm, the kind of warmth that doesn't reach you. On the counter sat the birthday cake chocolate, his favorite. Someone else had baked it, someone younger. The edges were uneven, the frosting smudged. Still, it would be good enough for him. Next to the sink was a cup, my cup, faded white with blue trim chipped at the rim. He'd given it to me one Father's Day when he was 9. Said I needed something better than the mugs at the office. I hadn't used it in years. I hadn't wanted to wear it out. Now it held nothing but a faint ring of old coffee. I stared at it for a long time, as if it might explain something, as if it might say what I couldn't. Outside, they sang, off-key, joyful. I heard my name once, followed by a muttered, "He'll be back." But I wouldn't be. Not this time. I walked to my room and took down the old duffel from the top shelf. The same one I used for work trips when he was little. He used to run to the door when I came back. "What did you bring me?" he'd ask, eyes wide. And now, disappear. I folded 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, my shaving kit, my copy of The Old Man and The Sea Creased and Weathered Like Me. Then I reached into the top drawer and pulled out the deed, still signed in my name. The cabin, the lake. The summers we used to spend catching fireflies and skipping stones. I placed it in an envelope. No note, no explanation, just the deed. Then I zipped the bag, and I walked out the back door. No one noticed, not even him. But I noticed everything. The sound of the screen door creaking shut. The way the porch light didn't flicker like it used to. The gift still unopened. And the mug still empty. It started with the candles. They were setting up in the dining room. His wife, 2 of his college friends, and the neighbor's teenage daughter, who was paid to take photos for the evening. They were all buzzing about like bees with a map, moving centerpieces, shifting napkins, deciding which side of the cake looked better for pictures. I stood near the fireplace, holding a lighter in one hand and a small box of candles in the other. The kind that spelled out "Happy Birthday" in shimmering gold letters. I'd picked them up the week before at a little shop downtown. One of those places that still played jazz over the speakers and offered you tea while you browsed. The clerk wrapped them carefully in tissue paper. "Someone special?" she had asked with a smile. "My son," I replied. "He's turning 35. Now I waited quietly to hand them over. I wasn't sure where to step. The room was full of motion, voices overlapping like a tide. Someone was already laughing about how much wine to open, Another debating which playlist felt more celebratory. A Bluetooth speaker thumped against the rhythm of conversation. I cleared my throat just once. No one looked up. I moved closer and gently offered the box to Mara, his wife. I brought these. Thought they might look nice on the cake. She took them automatically, glancing down without really seeing. "Oh, thanks, Robert," she said, more out of reflex than warmth. Then she turned to the younger girl beside her, lowering her voice. "Can you check if the caterer's bringing their own sparklers? I'd rather not use these if they're cheap. Might melt too fast." I heard it. I heard all of it. But I just nodded and stepped back. My hand still smelled faintly of the citrus soap I'd used after washing up. I rubbed my thumb against my palm, trying to scrub away something I couldn't name. Behind me, the kitchen clock ticked. A low, dependable sound. I used to say it reminded me of my father's heartbeat, steady and serious. Now it just reminded me that time doesn't pause, not even when you want to press your hand against a moment and beg it to hold still. A voice broke through. "Dad, do you mind moving the coat rack? We're trying to set up a photo corner." My son's voice. Light, casual, like asking someone to pass the salt. I turned. "Sure, where should I put it?" "Just somewhere out of the way. Maybe in the garage." Somewhere out of the way. I lifted the rack and old walnut stand with curved hooks I'd refinished myself the year he moved into his first apartment. It had held everything from baby blankets to briefcases. Now it clattered against the garage door as I nudged it inside, dodging boxes and a lawn chair that hadn't been unfolded since last spring. As I came back inside, the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air. Someone had opened the oven. Laughter bloomed from the dining room again. The playlist had changed. Something more upbeat now. I paused in the hallway and adjusted a crooked picture frame. A photo of the two of us at a baseball game. He was maybe 10, gap-toothed and leaning into my side. I remember that day. I'd caught a foul ball, handed it to him, and he held it like a crown. He doesn't remember. Or if he does, he doesn't say so. The front door opened just then, bringing in a gust of evening air and more guests. Someone called out greetings. Someone else complimented the table. And then I heard it, the photographer's voice, light and curious. "Whose house is this again?" Mara replied. "Ours. Technically mine, but we're thinking of selling in the spring." I stood still in the hallway. It wasn't anger, not quite. Just that slow, familiar ache of fading, like watching ink dry on a letter no one will ever read. I turned back toward the kitchen. The candles were still in their box on the counter, untouched. The next morning, I found the box of birthday candles still sitting on the kitchen counter, unopened. They had used sparklers, the kind that fizz and crackle and leave a trace of smoke in the air, like something vanishing right before your eyes. There was a photo someone showed me on their phone later, not realizing I hadn't seen it in person. My son stood smiling in front of the cake. The gold candles I'd bought were nowhere to be seen. The box remained where I left it, by the sink, next to the cup, that cup, white with blue trim, chipped at the rim. I used it every morning when I lived alone, always rinsed it and set it gently in the rack. It had become a habit to find it waiting for me, a small, steady part of my morning. But here it was just decoration, the kind of thing that gathered dust until someone decided it wasn't worth the space. On Sunday, I reached for it like I always did. The cupboard was full of newer mugs, ceramic with witty quotes, bright colors, oversized handles. I found mine pushed to the back, turned on its side, the chip pressed against the wall like it was something to be hidden. I washed it again, even though it was already clean, and poured the coffee I'd brewed while the others were still asleep. Then I sat at the small table in the corner, the one near the window with the crooked blind. It used to be the breakfast table. I remember helping him with spelling words here, pancakes on Saturdays, glue sticks and construction paper during snow days. Now it was the overflow table, where guests dropped purses or where someone sat when the dining table got too crowded. I sat there quietly, holding the cup in both hands. It still fit perfectly between my palms. Still warmed my knuckles the way it used to. I looked through the blinds at the backyard. The garden I planted was gone. Mulched over, replaced by gravel and potted succulents. They said it was cleaner that way, easier to manage. I sipped the coffee. It had gone lukewarm already. That evening, Mara asked me to help set the table for dinner. A small thing, an ordinary request. But I noticed as I placed the plates that mine wasn't among them. "Don't worry," she said quickly when she saw me pause. "We figured you'd already eaten. You're always up so early." I hadn't eaten. I hadn't even realized I'd been skipped. "I can warm something up," I offered gently. "Oh, no need," she replied, already turning away. "It's just leftovers anyway." I sat at the overflow table again, this time with a bowl of soup, microwaved in silence. The others laughed about something in the next room, something I couldn't hear and wouldn't have understood even if I had. The next day, I washed the cup again, and again the day after that, always by hand, always alone. No one ever touched it but me. It became a ritual, a quiet one. Rinse, dry, set it by the sink, like clockwork. But each time I returned, it was moved. Not far, just enough to know someone had picked it up and placed it elsewhere. Sometimes it was back in the cupboard, hidden behind the others. Sometimes it had been nudged near the trash bin, as if in transit. Once it was in the dishwasher, though I never put it there, and always it was still chipped. Still mine. Still the only thing in the house that hadn't been replaced. That evening, I passed by a conversation in the hallway. Mara was on the phone. I wasn't meant to hear, but the door was slightly ajar. "I mean, it's not like he lives here," she whispered. "He just hangs around. I know, it's sweet, but it's like he doesn't know when to leave. He doesn't really belong in this space anymore. Doesn't belong." I stepped back before she saw me, back into the kitchen, back to the sink. I picked up the cup, and for a moment, I wondered what it would feel like to let it slip. Just once. Just to hear it shatter. Instead, I held it tighter. Because it was the only thing left in that house I still recognized as mine. I hadn't thought about the lake cabin in years. Not really. Not fully. Not the way it smelled like pine and old leather after a storm. Not the creak of the porch swing or the way the screen door snapped shut if you didn't catch it in time. Not the soft glug of the dock ropes tugging against the mooring posts while dragonflies hovered just above the waterline. But this morning, as I poured coffee into that chipped white cup, the one with the blue rim, I remembered a birthday years ago, his 9th. We were at the cabin for the weekend, just the two of us. His mother had taken a shift at the hospital, and it was supposed to be a guy's trip, though it was really just me trying to hold it all together. He'd been quiet that week, a little moody. I figured something had happened at school, but he wouldn't say. I made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. He pretended not to care. But when I brought out the small box with the fishing lure inside, silver and red, with a hand-carved tail, his whole face lit up. "Is it real?" he asked, holding it like it was gold. "Of course it is," I told him. "But it's not just for catching fish, it's for catching memories." He rolled his eyes. "That's so corny, Dad." And then he hugged me. No warning, no hesitation. Just threw his skinny arms around my neck and pressed his face against my shoulder. He smelled like lake water and syrup. That night, we sat out on the deck, wrapped in an old wool blanket. He leaned against me, tired but happy, a marshmallow stick still clutched in one hand. The stars were everywhere, scattered like salt across a black table. "I want to live here when I grow up," he said. "You can," I told him. "It'll be yours someday. Promise? Promise." He fell asleep before the fire died down. I carried him inside, tucked him under the quilt his grandmother had made, blue and gray with stitched canoes and trees. He looked so small then, so sure that I was someone who would always catch him if he stumbled. The next morning he drew me a picture. A little stick figure holding a fishing pole beside a tiny red cabin. Above it, in big wobbly letters, he wrote, "Best Dad ever." I folded that drawing into my wallet, kept it there until the ink faded, until the corners curled, until one day I opened my wallet and realized I hadn't looked at it in years. That cabin still stands, my name still on the deed, the quilt still on the bed, the porch swing still creaking with memory. It sat empty the last few winters. Too much to maintain, they'd said. We should probably sell. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because when the house got too quiet, and the conversations too clipped, and the cup too far pushed to the back of the shelf, I would think of that night. Of the boy who believed I could fix anything. Of the arms that held tight and the eyes that searched the stars with hope. I don't know what happened to that boy, but I still remember the way he hugged me. And sometimes in the silence of the guest room they never offer me any more, I take that cup in both hands and imagine that moment again. Not to cling to it, but to remind myself that I was once central to someone's life, that I mattered, that I was loved, even if only for one birthday, even if only by a boy who no longer remembers. It was late most of the guests had left, save for a few lingering in the living room with half-empty glasses and soft jazz playing low in the background. The night had settled into that hush that comes after too much wine and too little meaning. I stood in the kitchen, rinsing plates that weren't mine. No one asked me to, but old habits linger like fog. When your presence is quiet enough, people begin to forget you're doing anything at all, or that you once used to be someone they listened to. The last plate clinked into the drying rack. I reached for the towel and paused. There it was, the box of candles. Still sealed, still untouched. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, for some reason I couldn't explain, I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. The little gold letters HAPPYBIRTHDAY glinted under the kitchen light. The kind of glint that made me think maybe it's not too late. Maybe they'd simply forgotten in the shuffle. Maybe they hadn't meant to brush them aside. I took a deep breath, walked toward the dining room and saw him, my son standing near the back window talking with Mara and two of her friends. He looked relaxed, laughing at something. His head tilted just the way it did when he was genuinely amused. For a second I saw the boy again. The one who used to tug my sleeve to show me the stars. The one who held my hand when crossing streets, even after he was too old to need to. Maybe, I thought, maybe if I handed him the candles now and said, "I found these again," he'd smile. Maybe he'd reach out, squeeze my shoulder and say, "Thanks, Dad, I forgot. Let's use them next year." Maybe. So I stepped forward. He didn't see me at first, but Mara did. She glanced down at the box in my hands, then at me. Her mouth twitched not cruelly, not unkindly, just briefly. The kind of look you give someone who's out of place. And then she turned back to her conversation. Didn't say a word, didn't smile, just turned. That was enough. I stood there still as stone, the box of candles suddenly heavy. He never saw me, or if he did, he pretended not to. The music drifted through the air, something jazzy, something soft, and I realized how loud silence could be when you're the only one hearing it. I turned back toward the kitchen, set the candles down next to the sink, and left them there. It was silly, really, expecting that a box of gold letters could repair something that had been quietly fraying for years. Hope, it turns out, doesn't break loudly. It fades, gently, like steam from a kettle no one notices has stopped whistling. That night, as I lay in the guest room door closed, no one checking in, I thought about the cabin, about the deed in my drawer still unsigned. And I thought, maybe it's time. Maybe I don't need to wait to be invited anymore. Maybe I can give him something without asking for anything in return. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just space and silence. The house was dark, except for the small lamp in the hallway. Motion activated, it flickered on for a few seconds when I opened the guest room door. That was the only light that noticed I was still here. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening. The laughter had died down. Someone turned off the music. Cabinets closed softly. Voices dimmed into goodbyes. Coats rustled. I waited until I heard the front door click shut one last time. Then silence. A complete, settled kind. I closed the door behind me. The guest room was cold, not enough for a complaint, just enough to feel like a reminder. A single bed tucked against the wall. No photos, no warmth. Just a thin comforter and a lamp with a flickering bulb that buzzed faintly, as if annoyed to be used. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the carpet, beige, worn, flattened in one corner where a desk used to be, probably before the room was downgraded into Dad's space. The kind of room you keep for utility, not comfort. My overnight bag was already packed neat, small. I hadn't meant to pack early. It just happened. Like I knew somehow that I'd need to. The cup was still in my hand. That chipped white cup with the blue rim. I don't remember bringing it in, but there it was, resting between my palms like a question I didn't know how to answer. It was empty, completely dry. I'd washed it, wiped it, held it for no reason at all. And yet it felt heavier than anything I'd carried in years. I thought of all the things I'd carried in silence. His heartbreak when his mother left. The bills that didn't stretch far enough. The cold mornings I drove him to practice before work. The quiet fear that I was failing and the louder lie I kept telling myself that love would be enough. That effort would be remembered. That fathers, once good, always mattered. I rested the cup on the nightstand and looked at my hands. They didn't even look like mine anymore. Skin thinner, veins like faded ink on a forgotten letter. These were hands that had once built bunk beds, scraped ice from windshields, fixed leaky faucets at midnight. Now they just trembled softly in my lap. I tried to lie down, but the blanket smelled of lavender and something else, maybe the detergent Mara used. It was too sweet, too foreign. I couldn't relax beneath it. So I sat up again and stared at the window. There was nothing to see. Just the faint outline of the tree in the yard and the porch light still on, glowing yellow across the brick path like a false promise of welcome. It was there, in that stillness, that I felt it. Not sadness, not even anger. Just absence, not of noise or presence, but of meaning. Like I'd become a soft blur at the edge of their picture. Not cut out, not erased. Just left to fade with time. And that's when I saw it, the gift. Still wrapped, still unopened. Someone had moved it to the hallway bench, tucked it beside the shoes like it was something to be dealt with later. Like a delivery no one remembered ordering. I stared at it through the crack in the door. The navy paper I had picked out carefully. The twine tied into a small knot he used to love untying as a boy. It looked so out of place, so untouched, so forgotten. And in that moment, something in me folded. Not loudly, not with tears. Just folded. like a coat gently hung for the last time. I walked to the nightstand, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. Inside, the deed. I'd signed it last week, but hadn't decided when to give it to him. Thought maybe I'd write a note. Maybe wait for the right moment. There wouldn't be one. So I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, right in the center. No note, no ceremony, just the deed. Clean. Simple. A gift without expectation. The last one. Then I reached for the cup and left it in the sink. It didn't belong with me anymore. The sun was already up when I reached the bus station. I hadn't planned on leaving so early, but I'd woken before dawn, unable to go back to sleep, and found myself staring at the ceiling of the guest room, watching light slowly press against the curtains like it was testing its own courage. The hallway was still dark as I walked out, my bag already packed. No one stirred. I didn't make coffee. I didn't reach for the cup. Instead, I set it clean, dry, chipped, as ever on the counter, not beside the sink this time, but in the middle of the kitchen island where it could be seen. No ceremony, no farewell, just presence. Let it be noticed, or not. It didn't matter anymore. Outside, the sky was pale gray, the kind of color that doesn't commit to being day or night. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly down the street, past the manicured lawns and recycling bins waiting for pickup. My breath fogged in the air. Each step felt deliberate. Each sound leaf shifting my shoes against the sidewalk sharp and clean, like the world had finally turned down its noise to let me hear my own thoughts. There was no rage in me, no bitterness, just a calm, long-overdue understanding. Somewhere between the unopened gift and the forgotten cup, I'd started to let go not of love, not of memory, but of hope that they'd ever see me the way I once was. And maybe that was the beginning of something honest. At the station, I paid in cash, one-way ticket. Not to the lake just yet. I wasn't sure I was ready for that kind of peace, but far enough to be somewhere with my own sky above me. I found a seat near the window, set my bag at my feet, and looked out across the parking lot. The trees swayed gently, indifferent and steady. As the engine started, I reached into my coat pocket for no reason at all and felt paper, the birthday card. I'd forgotten I'd brought it. A simple thing, blank inside, just my handwriting in clean, steady letters. Happy birthday, son. I hope you find what you're looking for. I didn't mail it, didn't leave it on the table, just folded it once and tucked it back into the envelope. I opened my bag, reached for the front pocket, and pulled out the small velvet box I'd wrapped his watch in. Still there, still neat. I didn't unwrap it. Instead, I set it on the empty seat beside me, rested my hand gently on top, and thought of all the times I'd given with open hands and closed expectations. This time would be different. This time, I wasn't leaving in grief. I was leaving in clarity. A soft, quiet reclaiming of space, of worth, of self. The cup, the gift, the card. They weren't losses, not anymore. They were markers. Gentle signposts of where I've been and where I wouldn't return to. Not as an afterthought, not as an empty chair, not as a background character in my own story. As the bus pulled away, I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because forward, for the first time in a long time, felt like mine. This cabin key was still where I'd left it, tucked in a rusted tin box behind the last row of books on my top shelf. A place no one else would think to look. The tin smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, like memory pressed flat. I turned the key over in my palm as I stood in the quiet of the small rental I'd booked 2 towns over. Nothing fancy, just a roadside inn with a lamp that flickered, and wallpaper from another decade. But the sheets were clean, the heat worked, and most of all, the silence was mine. The envelope with the signed deed was gone, left on the kitchen table in their house. Given, not asked to be opened, just given. But the cabin? That was still a choice, a place, a piece of me that hadn't been erased or repurposed or politely pushed to the edge. I wrapped the key in a handkerchief and placed it carefully in my coat pocket. The drive took less than an hour. The roads narrowed the farther north I went, pine trees arching overhead like guardians. Familiar turns. Familiar dips. The kind of familiarity that reaches deeper than comfort. It lives in your bones. When I pulled up, the cabin looked the same as ever, slightly weathered, the porch steps a little soft, the window boxes empty, waiting for spring. But it stood, not forgotten, not removed, just waiting. I unlocked the door. The hinges groaned in greeting as I stepped inside. Dust floated in the golden strip of morning light that poured across the wooden floorboards. The air smelled of cold wood, old quilts, and the echo of summers past. Everything was exactly where I remembered it. The kettle on the stove, the braided rug by the hearth, the old rocking chair still tucked in its corner, a faded patch of sun-stained cushion marking where I'd sat most often, and on the mantel just above the coal fireplace, the same photograph, me and him, fishing poles in hand. He's maybe 10, squinting into the light, mouth open in a laugh. I remember that day. He'd slipped on the dock and blamed the fish for it. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence of the place wash over me. Then I unpacked. Not just my bag, but slowly, with care. I lit the small fire with kindling I found in the old metal bin. The flames caught quickly, rising with a satisfying crackle. I set water to boil, not in haste, just as ritual. The chipped white cup wasn't with me. It was theirs now. But here I used an old ceramic mug with a missing handle. Sturdy, balanced in the hand, imperfect in a way that didn't beg to be replaced. I sat in the rocking chair with the mug resting on the windowsill, watching the lake beyond the trees glint under the low winter sun. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like an interruption in someone else's day. I felt present. No one had called. No one would. But I didn't feel abandoned. Not here. Not now. I placed the velvet box, the birthday gift, on the mantel, unwrapped, unopened, just resting there, a quiet artifact of love given, not returned. Let it stay here. Let it become part of the place that remembered me. Later that evening, I found the old guest book we used to keep for visitors. Yellow pages, frayed spine. I opened it, turned past names scrawled in crayon and blocky teenage handwriting. On a blank page, I wrote, February 12th, I came back, not to be remembered, but to remember myself. I signed my name and closed the book. Outside, the lake was beginning to freeze at the edges, small fingers of ice reaching toward the dock. But inside, the fire burned soft and steady. And for once, that was enough. It came in the mail 2 weeks later. A postcard. I found it tucked between a utility bill and a flyer for gutter cleaning, its glossy front showing the lake cabin under a blanket of snow just like I remembered it in winter. The dock half buried, the pine trees softened in white. The mailbox at the edge of the drive opened just slightly, as if expecting something. I turned it over. 3 words. I was wrong. No signature, no return address, just that. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough for the kettle behind me to whistle, then quiet again. There was a time when those 3 words would have cracked something open in me. Hope, maybe, or grief, or the old ache of being seen too late. But now they settled into me like snowfall. Soft, cold, and quiet. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I had nothing left to explain. No more space to clear at a table that was never set for me. No more cups to wash in silence. I picked up the postcard and carried it into the living room. The fireplace was still warm from the morning's fire. I crouched slowly, my knees stiff from the cold, and tucked the postcard into the edge of the hearth. Not to burn, just to rest. Not a token of forgiveness. Not a wound, either. Just a record of a moment, a sentence, a page that no longer needed a reply. Then I reached for the old ceramic mug, the one missing its handle, and washed it by hand, slowly, like it deserved care even in its imperfection. I dried it with the checkered towel, folded it neatly, and placed both back on the shelf. Later that evening, I bundled in my coat and walked out to the edge of the property, where the path meets the woods. In my hand, I held the navy-wrapped gift, still unopened, still exactly as I had tied it that morning, ribbon neat, corners sharp. I stood there for a moment, feeling the cold kiss at my cheeks. Then I crouched, dug gently into the snow near the base of a birch tree, and placed the box inside. Not buried, just nestled. Then I pressed the snow back over it like a blanket. A gift never opened, a story never received, but not forgotten. I stood, brushed the snow from my gloves, and turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire would be waiting, and this time no one would ask me to move the coat rack or wait in the kitchen or eat alone at the overflow table. There was no overflow here, only room and warmth and stillness that belonged to me. The morning light came slow over the lake. It stretched in soft gold across the snow-covered porch, touched the frost-lined windows, and spilled like honey through the thin curtains into the cabin's main room. I sat in the rocker, wrapped in the wool blanket that still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, watching the light creep its way across the floorboards. I hadn't spoken aloud in days, and yet I'd never felt more heard. The world, for once, didn't require me to explain myself. I rose slowly, joints stiff from stillness, and made my way to the stove. The kettle was already warm from the fire I'd stirred back to life earlier. I poured water into the old ceramic mug, the one with the missing handle, and held it between both hands like something sacred. The first sip was quiet. Not perfect, but deeply mine. Outside, a light wind moved through the trees. Pine needles whispered against one another, a rhythm older than memory. I moved through the cabin with ease, now muscle memory, returning in small ways. The way the door stuck if you didn't lift the handle just slightly. The squeak of the third floorboard in the hallway. The drawer that always needed a push to close fully. Every imperfection was familiar. Every corner, every worn rug, every sun-faded cushion was something I'd once touched, cleaned, repaired, or ignored. These things remembered me. Not as a guest, not as a relic, but as the one who stayed when others moved on. At some point in the afternoon, I walked down to the dock. The snow here was softer, untouched. The ice had grown over the lake now, clear in patches and silver where the wind had skimmed its surface clean. I sat at the edge and looked out. No one was coming. And still. I smiled. Not from joy exactly, but from something steadier. Something that had taken root in silence and had begun to grow not loud or showy, but firm. Peace. Not the kind you beg for. The kind you build when no one else remembers how. That evening I lit a fire again. Not because I was cold, but because I wanted to. Because the sound of the logs cracking, the way the orange light flickered against the stone hearth that was a kind of conversation all its own. I read for a while. Not a book I'd planned on, just one I found in the cabin's small shelf, an old novel with yellowed pages and a cracked spine. I didn't even finish the chapter. That wasn't the point. Later, I stood at the mantel and looked at the small collection of things I'd allowed to gather there. The birthday gift, still wrapped. The photo of him as a boy, fishing rod in hand, grinning into sunlight. The mug washed and set carefully in its place. And beside them, I placed the postcard. I was wrong. No frame, no flourish. Just resting there, not for forgiveness, not for memory, but as proof that I had been here, that I had once given all I had, and that I had learned when to stop waiting for a return that would never come. That night before bed, I opened the window just a little, enough to let in the sound of wind through trees, the far-off call of a winter bird. And as I turned down the blanket, I looked toward the chair by the fire. The light had dimmed, but the last glow of the coals still pulsed softly like a heartbeat. I thought briefly of that chipped white cup. How long I'd held it. How long I'd waited for it to be noticed. And how, in the end, I was the only one who truly understood what it held. I'd left it behind not in anger, but in release. It belonged to a chapter that had already closed. This chapter, this quiet place, this earned stillness was mine. I turned off the light, laid my head on the pillow, and as sleep came, soft and unhurried, I breathed in the scent of wood smoke and pine and something else. Something I hadn't felt in years, belonging, not in someone else's story, but in my own.